All right, the world that then was. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1. I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, that's from the King James translation. Today we're going to be discussing what's called the world that then was. This is the third part of this three-part series in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. The third and final part. And this is going to add to last week's cover of, we dealt with the topic in Isaiah chapter 14, the fall of Lucifer, verses 12 through 20. And this is going to be a continuation of that discussion, as well as a continuation of the discussion of the larger discussion of the what's called the 5 world ages paradigm, which was best explained probably by Finis Dake, and it was a common view by old-time Pentecostals, as well as leaders within the latter-rain revival movement of 1948. And it finds expression again in Patricia Bill Gruett's book, Understanding God and His Covenants, which was basically it was a latter-rain staple of theology. And it finds expression again later with many of the leaders of the deliverance movement in the 1960s. We're talking about the 5 world ages paradigm. The Hebrew word olam is the word from which is translated, sometimes translated as world, sometimes translated as ages, depending on the context. Both uses of the English words are appropriate, and depending on the usage of the term in context, either one of those is appropriate. So I've just chosen to use the term world age to basically explain this word olam. Now, a few weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago, we discussed the 5 specific world ages that we're talking about. The different periods of time in earth history by which we have revelation from Scripture. Different periods of time that come consecutively. 5 of these ages, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th world ages, or the 5th olamim. The first world age is what is the pre-Adamic or prehistoric age that Dake called this the anti-chaotic world age. The Scripture calls it the world that then was. And that period of time ended with what is understood to be the fall of Lucifer. Then the second world age was inaugurated, and the second world age, the second olam, was what Dake called the antediluvian age, and that's the period of time after the fall of Lucifer up to the time of the flood of Noah. He calls it the antediluvian age that ended with the flood of Noah, the Noahic flood. The third world age, the olam hazeh, is the time we're in today, is the present world age. The fourth world age, the olam haba, is the age to come. Basically what people refer to often as the millennium, the 1,000-year period that the book of Revelation speaks about. And the fifth and final world age, the olamim, is the age of ages. That's eternity future, the time without end. This teaching today, it continues our discussion, what we've already laid, foundations, about the first, about these 5 ages, but specifically about that first world age. We're going to continue that discussion today. The world that then was. Anything else that has to do with basics or foundations, I'm going to refer you back to the other videos on this topic, especially the other previous 2 videos that came before this. Now, this teaching today is going to continue on, it's all about that first world age. We talked about it last week, and we talked about it from Isaiah chapter 14 last week, but today I'm going to continue with the first world age, but I'm going to go to a different portion of Scripture. We're going to mostly talk about the first world age from the context of Ezekiel chapter 28. Now, commentaries have looked into both Isaiah chapter 14 and Ezekiel 28. Many commentaries will tell you, you can consult many commentaries, many of them will refer that they'll say that there's something unique about these 2 passages. Isaiah 14 verses 12 through 20 and Ezekiel chapter 28 verses 11 through 19. There's something about those passages that scholars recognize. It's not just talking about the plain obvious context. For example, we mentioned last week that Isaiah chapter 14 on the context is referring to the king of Babylon. It doesn't give a name of any specific king, it just refers to the king of Babylon. But as the passage moves along, by the time you get down to chapter 14 verse 12, that section between verses 12 and 20 seems completely different. It almost seems out of place. It seems to be talking about something more than just an earthly human king of Babylon. It seems to be obviously talking about what, for all intents and purposes, in the reading, seems to be talking about a supernatural entity and a supernatural event. The same thing you're going to see today in Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 11 through 19, where it is not referring to just an earthly king, but to what is apparently a supernatural entity. So these passages, Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, are what we call double reference passages. A double reference passage is when a passage has a meaning that's referring to an immediate context, but also has a meaning that's referring to another context, particularly a prophetic context or a future context, whether it's future or a prophetic context that is referring to the past. And that's what I call, when it's referring to the past, first of all, when it's referring to the future, that's obvious. That's referring to what they call a predictive prophecy. But it's referring to the past. Scholars have given different names to that, but I use the term retroscopic prophecy. Prophecy that looks deep into the past to attain knowledge that couldn't otherwise be known in the natural. Supernatural revelation given to past events. Both Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 seem to be that kind of the nature of prophecy. It is retroscopic prophecy, prophecy reaching deeply, deeply into the past, referring to things that a human person couldn't possibly know on their own. Now, the passage today is going to come out of Ezekiel chapter 28. And the reason why this connects to, and if you go and you look at the other videos to see the background on this connects to, the reason why we're connecting this to Genesis chapter 1, verses 1, 2, and 3, particularly verses 1 and 2, is because many people believe, I'm among them that believe this way, that these prophecies, these so-called retroscopic prophecies that look into the past, are actually looking into an event that took place on the earth that fits in the time frame between verses 1 and 2 of Genesis chapter 1. Ezekiel chapter 28, I'm turning there, and our section is actually going to begin in verse 11. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but we're going to begin in verse 11. Scholars admit that they believe that this is referring to the same thing, because of many similar uses of terminology, the same thing that Isaiah 14 that we talked about last week is referring to, namely, that is referring to the fall of Lucifer. Let me read that portion. Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 11 through 19. I'm just going to read it, and then I'll get commentated on in a minute. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus. Now, it says Tyrus here in the King James, talking about the king of Tyre. This is, again, not a named king. There's not a name for the king, but it's just said the king of Tyre. The king of Tyre, many scholars believe, many commentators believe, is just simply a typological symbol, the backdrop on which the story of the fall of Lucifer is put upon. So again, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord Elohim, the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl and the onyx, and the jasper and the sapphire, the emerald and the carbuncle, and gold, the workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in all thy ways, from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. By the multitude of thy merchandise they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness, and I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. It shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of them that behold thee. All they that know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be any more. Now that's the passage. It's the main passage we're going to be referring to today. There's a lot there that sounds a lot like what we read from in Isaiah chapter 14 last week. Scholars do believe that these two things go together. They're referring to the same event. Whereas in Isaiah chapter 14 is talking about the king of Babylon, here in Ezekiel 28 it's talking about the king of Tyre. In both cases, they're not really talking about an earthly king, but talking about a ruler that is unnamed in the passage, except where we see the term Lucifer used. They believe that this is a double reference prophecy, therefore. In this case, it's a retrospective prophecy, retroscopic prophecy looking backward in time. Now, I want to share this. Like I said, a lot of commentators do believe that. You're going to find this as a kind of a normal belief, especially when you go and you look in older commentaries. And this was pretty much the standard belief among the early Pentecostals, and especially within the Latter Rain movement. This was a common view that this is referring to the fall of Lucifer. Not to a king, not to an earthly king, but to the fall of Lucifer. Same with Isaiah chapter 14. And a lot of people during the Latter Rain movement talked a lot about this. Now I'm holding in my hand here a book by Lamar Boschman, and it's come through Destiny Image Publishing Company. It's called The Rebirth of Music. And he discusses a little bit about this section. In the beginning of his book in chapter 1, Lamar Boschman, I just wanted to present this because I wanted to give a little bit of background. Lamar Boschman was the worship leader who, his background comes from the Latter Rain movement. He was one of the principal worship leaders that was well known during the time of what was called the Restoration of David's Tabernacle, during the 1970s especially, with the International Worship Symposium. And there's some material here in this chapter that was being used by a lot of the Latter Rain leaders in reference to, as it pertains in relationship to praise and worship. Lamar Boschman, being a worship leader who comes from that movement, took that material and jumped on it and used it as the basis for the first chapter of his book here. And in it, he discusses the prospect that Lucifer, using the term Lucifer, Halel ben Shachar, that Lucifer in actuality was the praise and worship leader of heaven. Now, and I don't disagree with that. I believe that that's exactly correct. I think, though, now there's more to it than that, but Lamar Boschman and others do see here in this passage cause for that reason. So for where it says, like, for example, it says here that in verse 13, verse 13, it says that thy tabrets and thy tabrets and of the pipes was prepared in the day that thou was created. So these are musical instruments. So the understanding is, based on verses like that the character Lucifer, his principal job in heaven, if you can put it that way, his principal calling in heaven was as the worship leader, the one who led all of heaven in its praise and worship of the one on the throne. And this very likely was his, we can say, occupation, as it was in heaven. He was one of the archangels, along with Michael, and Gabriel, and others who were among the archangels of heaven. His principal job was to lead in the praise and worship at the throne of the Most High. There's a lot of detail in there I'm not going to get into, but I wanted to connect that to this teaching because that had been brought up to me before. So Lucifer, if you put all the story of it together, Lucifer was likely the leader of worship in heaven as well as a ruler over a kingdom on a planet, and that planet happens to be the earth. He was the leader and the ruler of this world during the world that then was. In heaven, he functioned as the praise and worship leader of the Most High. But this individual became corrupted in his heart, filled with pride, we're told, because of his own beauty, and he devised a plan. And that plan was to set up a kingdom that was to rival the kingdom of heaven, to have the angels to follow after him, the malachim, the angels, and to do so in a legal way that the Creator wouldn't be able to stop him. And that's basically the gist of this idea. So we were talking about Lucifer's rebellion last week out of Isaiah chapter 14. And we learned some things. That from this rebellion, it was anticipated on his earthly dominion, first of all. His dominion was actually an earthly dominion. But he ascended up to heaven with intent to win the support of the angelic council. I'm sure that the pretense for that was probably based a lot on his position, his clout, his authority that was already recognized in the heavenly dimensions, and he was using that as a way to be able to garner support for his rebellion. But when he ascended up to heaven, he entered into the heavenly court in the chamber of the heavenly sanctuary. And there, according to Revelation chapter 12, he convinced a third of the malachim, the third of the angels, to follow after him. And a rebellion broke out in heaven. And in the process of this rebellion breaking out in heaven, we're going to see a little bit later in this teaching, that the heavenly articles of the heavenly sanctuary became defiled in the process, which required, of course, there to be an atonement to cleanse for the heavenly articles. Lucifer then was cast out of the council, thrown down to the earth, if you continue to follow this all the way through, and then upon that moment where he was cast out, thrown down to the earth, the Most High vows punishment and amasses his mighty army. And that's where it picks up on today's teaching. So just like with Isaiah chapter 14, which was a double reference prophecy, retroscopically looking backward into time at this rebellion, this one here in Ezekiel chapter 28 is also a retroscopic prophecy looking backward at the same event. So they go together. Isaiah chapter 14 and Ezekiel 28 are describing the same event. Both of them are double reference prophecy. Both of them are retroscopic in nature, looking backward. Both of them start off by using an earthly king, a generic earthly king, as a canvas upon which to paint the picture of the ancient Luciferian rebellion. The one in Isaiah said the king of Babylon, but really it was referring to Lucifer. The one here in Ezekiel 28 also, it's the king of Tyre, but really it's referring to the same Lucifer. Or Halel ben Shachar in his Hebrew name, the ancient serpent. So here in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 11 to 19, which I just read to you, verse 12 says, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyre, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. There it says that he's perfect in beauty. This entity, Halel ben Shachar, Lucifer, was perfect and beautiful and perfect in his beauty. That, one could say it maybe from the earthly perspective. Oftentimes, for humans, you could argue, beauty can go to the head. Talent can go to the head. Popularity can go to the head. Renown can go to the head. Talent, ability, anything can go to a person's head. So here is a being which is perfect in beauty and in every way, above all the other creatures that was made. In this dimension of perfection in which Halel ben Shachar, Lucifer, occupied, at some point it went to his head. He became consumed in his own pride, consumed in his own beauty, consumed in his own perfection, and began, for whatever reason, to begin to believe that he deserved more than the office that he was occupying. He was the leader of worship in heaven and the ruler of a kingdom on earth, and yet he wanted more. It wasn't enough for him. He wanted to rule over all of the angels as well as the earth, and he wanted a kingdom his own, and he wanted a rival kingdom, that was in opposition, or at least in comparison, to the kingdom of Elohim. And so verse 13 says, "Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering." A lot of people have asked me what was meant by he was in Eden, the garden of God. And the many commentators feel like that what that means is that upon this earth there was a literal place where the headquarters of his kingdom here on this planet was in Eden. The same Eden, some believe, perhaps the same Eden that later Adam would be put into. And that's very possible. We don't know it for sure, but that's one possible rendition. Whether there was another place upon earth called Eden, we don't know. But in whatever case, he was placed in a place called Eden, the garden of God. And he was given, perhaps it was like I've seen it, or I've heard people describe it, maybe it was like a robe. And on this robe was all of these precious gems and these jewels, these like diamonds and topaz and beryl and onyx and sardius stone and topaz and jasper and sapphire and emeralds, and all of these stones were affixed to this robe that he was given. So beauty was the thing that was most noted for this being. In addition, the musical instruments, his ability to his talent and his ability to make music as a worship leader of heaven, he was specifically designed for this purpose. So it says here that the tabrets and thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou was created. And Lamar Boschman and some others have deduced that what that means is that in his very being, in the makeup of his very nature, perhaps in his very body, the sources for music making was actually part of his nature. It emanated from within his very body. Verse 14. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. All right. Now, this entity, Halel ben Shachar, or Lucifer, in this place it says, thou art the anointed cherub. Now, this is kind of an interesting terminology here, because when it says anointed cherub, the Hebrew word is mimshah. It means the anointed one. It's from the same root word that we get the word Mashiach, or Messiah. That shows the status and position that Lucifer occupied. Halel ben Shachar was the anointed one over the earth. Halel was assigned by Yahweh Elohim specifically for this task, we're told here. He was placed to be over the earth as Yahweh's representative to the earth, the agent of his rule upon the earth. In verse 15 it says, thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. Again, the concept of his perfection is emphasized, and he was perfect in every way. From the day of his creation until the day that iniquity was found in him. Iniquity is the sin. Iniquity was found in Halel. That iniquity came up with this rebellion, this alternative will. We talked about the 5 wills last week. It's a self-determined will. When another will arises in addition to the will of the sovereign King of heaven, that additional will, it's considered to be a rival will. And Lucifer's will was a rival will. He had a self-sovereign autonomy in his mind. That is, he wanted autonomy without the Lord and apart from his order. He had a desire and was filled with a desire to rule over the world himself. He wanted to be his own boss. He didn't want to listen to the Creator. He wanted to do things his own way, his own kingdom, with his own rules and his own laws. Verse 16, by the multitude of thy merchandise they have filled the midst of thee with violence. Now that's an interesting verse, because it says in the multitude of thy merchandise. What this tells us, this verse, this is kind of a new information for us. What this tells us is that in the kingdom that he ruled over, there was a civilization here. A civilization that carried on trade and commerce. Merchandise. A kingdom that trafficked in wealth that Hallel ruled over. And yet, none of that was still enough. He wanted more, and so he rebelled. Sin, if we look at this, that was perfect in all thy ways until from the days that thou was created, till iniquity was found in thee. This is the important takeaway on that verse. Sin originated not with the Lord. The Lord did not create sin. The Lord did not preordain sin. There are some people who teach that, There are people who teach that it's the Lord's will that sin exists, that the Creator foreordained sin. Sin did not originate with the Creator. Neither did sin originate with Adam and Eve in the garden. It originated before Adam and Eve. Sin originated in the heart of Hallel ben Shachar, Lucifer, when iniquity was found in his heart, and he began a rebellion against the kingdom of heaven. Sin originated with Hallel ben Shachar, not Adam and Eve, but with Lucifer. And here again we see, once again, that Hallel is described as being cast out. So verse 17, thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty, and thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. Excuse me. I will cast thee to the ground. You see that concept of being cast again. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. So here, it says, thine heart was lifted up because of thine beauty. Now, what Lucifer is doing here, he's got this idea in his mind that he's going to be the master. There have been people in the past who said, well, why would Lucifer think that he could overthrow the Creator off the throne and take over heaven? And there's nothing in any of those verses that imply that that's what he had in mind. Nothing that says that he thought that he was going to topple the heavenly Creator off the throne. He was in the process of trying to create a rival kingdom to oppose the throne of heaven. All because of this pride in his heart. And being very intelligent, it wasn't that he thought that he could somehow usurp the throne of heaven, usurp the Creator, usurp the kingdom of the Creator by taking over the throne. That wasn't his thought. What was in mind was the idea that he could legally position himself in a position of kingdom authority, and the heavenly Creator couldn't do anything about it. So he's using laws to find loopholes around these laws to be able to establish himself and his kingdom as a rival kingdom against the Lord. In other words, we talked about the law of authority last week and the week before, and the law of authority is what he's using. He knows if he can take the law of authority and use it in his advantage, then he can put himself in a position of rulership legally, and the Creator, who abides by his own laws, would have to recognize the legality of that and not do anything about it. He thought he could get away with it. And so he almost did, apparently. Well, when I say that, he almost did from the perspective of the Malachim, the angels. I say that because it says that a third of the stars of heaven were cast out with him. That's a third of the angels. That's a lot of angels. And so he came close to really establishing some kind of a kingdom of his own. He thought he was going to use the law of authority to accomplish this, but the Lord was always one step ahead of him. Hallel wanted to use this law of authority to legally expand his kingdom from this earth into the throne realm of heaven over all of the heavenly malachim. The malachim are the angels. Scripture says the stars of heaven. But Yahuwah, blessed be his name, pronounced judgment on him, cast him out of heaven, out of the mountain of the council of heaven, the council of the divine ones, cast him out back down to the earth, and then that set up the next step, what was the ruination of the earth. Immediately thereafter, or immediately during that period of time, I should say, in verse 18 we see this: Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. So again, traffic, we see trade there. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee, it shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all men that beheld thee. So the Lord is now pronouncing a judgment. So he's cast him out of heaven down upon the earth, and the Lord is now pronouncing a judgment upon him. He says, I'm not done with this. This is now what's going to happen. So he pronounces a judgment. Now, in the time period that this is going on, where he is in the heavenly sanctuaries, there apparently is a contamination that takes place in the heavenly sanctuaries. Now, I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But the rebellion of Lucifer caused some sort of heavenly contamination. Hallel caused the heavenly sanctuary to become contaminated by the sin of rebellion. So, again, sin originated with Hallel, or with Lucifer. And it contaminated the heavenly articles long before Adam Rishon, that's the first Adam, was created. Okay, verse 19. All they that know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be any more. The authority and dominion that Yahuwah had given Hallel was rescinded from him, and it returned to the giver. Hallel ben Shachar, or Lucifer, tried to exact absolute sovereign rule over this earth, independent of Yahuwah and of his kingdom, independent of his kingdom order, in order to establish a rival order, and desired to extend that dominion even over the Malachim, the angels of heaven, the beings of the heavenly realms. Now, in the process of this, doing this, and planning this, and launching this, Hallel then realized that because he defiled the sanctuaries of his own earthly reign, Hallel knew that judgment was coming. So Hallel launched a preemptive move by invading heaven. And using the law of authority, Hallel sought to establish his own rival kingdom legally and buy himself some time against that judgment. So Hallel ascended from the earth to seduce the heavenly principalities on his own legal claims to rally their support behind his bid for a kingdom. But we learn in Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 9, it says this: And there was war in heaven. Michael, that's Michael, and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So you see, Hallel had ascended into heaven, into the heavenly dimensions, but he was met there by Michael. Michael is an archangel, the angel Michael. And we see here that war broke out in heaven. Now, that's when Hallel was defeated and thrown out of heaven. After this, Hallel retreated back to the earth to make his last stand with the, as we learn here, the kings of this world, in other words, his ruling council. Then, Yahuwah, blessed be he, himself, Yahuwah himself, took the lead in the advance and went forth out of heaven and utterly destroyed the earth and Hallel's kingdom. Now, with that, I want to look at what happens next, because you find the very next thing is the Lord's attack upon the earth and what happened. And it is graphically described in Psalm chapter 18. Psalm chapter 18 describes what the Lord did to Lucifer and to the earth. It's a graphic description of the earth's destruction, in fact. It is another double reference prophecy. It's by David. And it is also retroscopic. It is looking to this event again. It's not, the context here is David's praise over having won his victory against Saul, who was trying to. But then when you get down to verse 7, suddenly it seems like the context shifts and becomes something much grander than just his victory over Saul. So from verses 1 to 6, it's David referring to his victory over Saul, and from verses 7 down to verse 15, it's talking about something altogether different. So it's not a regular double reference prophecy, it's one of those retroscopic prophecies again. All right, so the context was David's victory song after his deliverance from King Saul, Shaul. But verses 7 through 15, however, suddenly the strange pericope interrupts the flow with an account that's so extreme that it does not seem to fit the rest of the psalm. The pericope between verses 7 through 15 is an example, once again, of what we call retroscopic prophecy, speaking about some other battle. I'm going to read it real quick for you. Then the earth shook and trembled, and foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken because of his wrath. There went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also and came down. So this is a description of the Lord himself coming down out of heaven. This is a description of how angry he was at this rebellion, that he himself came up off the throne. You know, it's said in Jewish commentary, it said the only time the Lord rises from the throne is when it's about to be judgment. So he comes up off the throne and he takes the lead in an army against the kingdom of earth, Lucifer's kingdom. The Lord himself, mind you. He bowed the heavens also and came down, and darkness was under his feet. Note that darkness motif. Okay? Darkness was under his feet. And he rode upon the cherub and did fly. Yea, he did fly upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his secret place. His pavilion round about him were dark waters. Get that? Dark waters. Very interesting wording. It's not an accident. Dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. And the brightness that was before him, his thick clouds passed, hailstones and coals of fire. The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the highest gave his voice, hailstones and coals of fire. Yea, he sent out his arrows and scattered them, and he shot out lightnings and discomfited them. Then the channels of the waters were seen, and the foundations of the world were discovered at thy rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of the breath of thy nostrils. Now that is a description of something way beyond anything that David personally experienced. A description of the Lord himself rising from his throne, mounting upon a cherub, coming to the earth, leading an army, sending forth lightnings and coals of fire and hail upon the earth, and destroyed the earth. And it says in verse 15 that the channels of the waters were seen. In other words, the waters themselves rose up, and you can see the beds of the waters. Now that phraseology I told you a minute ago, dark waters and thick clouds of the skies, this is referring back to what we read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. And darkness was upon the face of the and darkness was upon the face of the waters, right? So what we have here is the context of the Lord's response to the rebellion that we read about in Isaiah and Ezekiel. This third part finishes the story of what happened with the rebellion. Now there's one more part, and that is the aftermath, which we'll talk about that in just a second. I'll get to that in just a moment. So it's speaking here between verses 7 and 15. It's not talking about David's victory. It's speaking here about Yahweh himself, who at this point is so mad that he has smoke pouring out of his nostrils. And he sends forth a barrage of thundering hailstones and coals of fire down upon the earth from the heavens, which caused the sky to bow up and the seas to come out of the sea basins and flood over the land, utterly destroying the earth. Now, at verse 16, it returns to David's original narrative, where it left off in verse 5, or excuse me, in verse 6. So, this strange pericope that we see between verses 7 through 15 describes a bigger war and its effect. It is a pre-Adamic war during a paleo world, a war that happened in the world that then was. Now, I'm going to look at one more passage in Jeremiah chapter 4. And Jeremiah chapter 4 is going to cover the section that has to do with the aftermath of this war. And I want you to pay attention to the wording because it brings us full circle. Right back to where we started in Genesis chapter 1. Listen. The aftermath is described in Genesis chapter 4. And if you look in verse 23 through 30, I beheld the earth. Mind you, this is right after what we just read. Psalm chapter 18, what the Lord did to the earth. Immediately after that is this section. Verse 23, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void. Sounds familiar. And the heavens, and they had no light. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all of the birds of the heavens were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness. That means it was a wasteland. And all of the cities thereof were broken down. So there were cities, and those cities were destroyed. They were broken down at the presence of the Lord, and by his fierce anger. For thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate, yet will I not make a full end. Or that's not a question, he's making a statement. The whole land will be desolate, yet I will not make a full end. He's leaving something behind that he can restore. For this shall the earth mourn, and the heavens above be black, because I have spoken it, I have purposed it, and I will not repent, neither will I turn back from it. All right, let me just go ahead and stop right there and continue on with the commentary on this, though. There's more that I could read, but that phrase there, right at the very beginning, where it says, and beheld the earth was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. That's right back to the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth became without form and void. Now you know why the earth became without form and void. Because of this war that took place in a paleo time, in a prehistoric period of time. A world that was left ruined, forsaken, covered in darkness and flood, without form and void. In other words, tohu wabohu, which is the exact Hebrew word there. This event is called the katabole, the overthrow of Lucifer. That word katabole means the casting down, or the throwing down. It can mean the overthrow, or I like to say the throwdown. The katabole was the overthrow of Lucifer and his kingdom. The event when Lucifer was cast out of heaven after attempting to establish a rival kingdom apart from Yahuwah's kingdom. Now, the term Lucifer, we talked about this another week. The term Lucifer is actually not the word used in the chapter. It's a Latinized translation of the name Halel, which is found in Ezekiel 28. Halel ben Shachar. Now, this Halel ben Shachar, he was a being, a celestial luminary, a spirit son of Elohim, who rebelled against Yahuwah's divine kingdom order, and now we know the full story. Halel proposed an alternative order that did away with all agency other than his own. Halel and his followers were cast out of heaven, and Halel, or Lucifer, became known as Satan. Now, so this is the story of the overthrow of Halel, or Lucifer. And it's what theologians refer to as the katabole. Now, I made a mention about a moment ago that in the event of the rebellion as it was occurring in the heavenlies, the heavenly chambers apparently became contaminated, and the heavenly articles became contaminated. If we look over in Hebrews chapter 9, verses 22 through 28, it says, "And almost all things are by law purged with blood, and without the shedding of blood there is no remission. It was therefore necessary that the patterns of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these." Now, by reading this, you have to ask a question. Why would the articles of heaven need to be purified? Now you know. The articles of heaven became impure because of the rebellion that managed to make it all the way up to the chambers of heaven. Lucifer, leading a rebellion, was the originator of sin, and there was a place there that became contaminated by that, and the only way to purify it was through blood, but not earthly blood, not blood from an animal. It says here, "For Messiah is the one who purified the heavenly articles. For Messiah is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into the heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of Elohim for us." So with his blood, he sprinkled upon the articles of heaven and purified the remnants of the rebellion that was left behind, the putrefaction that was caused by the rebellion of Lucifer, purified by the blood of Messiah Yeshua. All right, so let me start bringing this to a conclusion here. Evil originated in the world that perished, the world that then was, not with Adam and Eve. Knowing all of this explains to us, in our time and age, it explains to us why Satan wants to control this world and why he wants to control all of humankind. Satan, or Halel, wants dominion authority back over his world. Basically, that's one way to put it. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, where we read, it says, "And God said, let there be light, and there was light." Well, that moment in verse 3 is the beginning of the second world age. The first age having been brought to ruin. Verse 3 is the beginning of the second world age. It's inaugurated right there in verse 3. Elohim begins to miraculously restore the earth to be inhabited again, and you see that throughout chapter 1. The reason that this study of the 5 world ages is important is so that we can understand the origin of evil in order to fulfill our purpose and destiny in relation to that. If it wasn't important for us to know about it, we wouldn't have those double reference prophecies looking into it. The Lord is trying to tell us something. He wants us to know a little bit about what our purpose in all of this is. In Psalm 115, verse 16, it says, "The heaven, even the heavens, are the Lord's, but the earth hath he given to the children of men." It's not being returned back to Lucifer. It's been given to the children of men. But Lucifer, in his pride and his jealousy, wants it back. That explains his attack upon the believers. So, as we said before, the Creator wanted stars. But stars cannot shine without darkness. Shabbat Shalom.